So welcome everyone, good evening. I'm glad to see you here this evening for this very important presentation. My name is Donna Amaral, and I'm an elected member of the Board of Health and a psychiatric mental health clinical nurse specialist. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and the Board of Health is sponsoring events that educate our community about this important public health issue. We can move forward together for mental health by increasing our understanding of some of the challenges experienced by youth, families, and ourselves. Remember this: early intervention is key in preventing a mental health crisis or tragedy. Tonight's presentation, Helping and Supporting Youth Mental Health First Aid, is an opportunity to learn how to provide support and access help when our middle and high school age kids are struggling or in an emotional crisis. I, in collaboration with Westport Middle and High School adjustment counselors Mary Jo Medeiros, Jennifer Borelli, and Sean Thomas, will address ways to recognize and respond to youth when they are struggling or experience a mental health crisis, and how they respond to the emotional needs of their students. There will be an opportunity at the end of the presentation to ask questions. So let me introduce our speakers. First is Jen Borelli, is a licensed mental health counselor and licensed adjustment counselor. She graduated with a Master's of Arts in Clinical Psychology from UMass Dartmouth and a Master's in Education from Plymouth State. Her early work in a correctional setting was with at-risk students, and she is currently the advisor to the school's Gay Straight Alliance. Mr. Thomas is also a licensed mental health counselor and graduated from Bridgewater State College with a master's degree in mental health counseling. He has worked in human services for over 20 years and has been a licensed outpatient counselor for 17. Earlier in his career, Mr. Thomas conducted forensic risk assessments for the Department of Child and Family Services and DCYF and probation in both Rhode Island and in Massachusetts. Outside of working at our school, Mr. Thomas still maintains a private counseling practice in Fall River that serves primarily teenagers, adults, and families. Mr. Thomas is currently the staff advisor to the school's anti-bullying club. Ms. Medeiros is a licensed social worker with a bachelor's degree in sociology from Southeastern Mass University and a master's in rehabilitative counseling from Assumption College. She has over 30 years' experience providing mental health services to clients in various clinical settings. In the past, she has sat on the boards of the Department of Mental Health and the Department of Children and Families. She has worked for the Westport School Department for over 15 years. And last but not least, at the end of our presentation, our special guest, Marissa Da Silva, a student from Dartmouth Middle School, will share what has helped her during her own mental health journey. So I'd like to begin to have you all look up at the screen and pay attention to the image that you see there. It's an adult supporting the hands of a young person who's sharing their heart with us. The help and support of one adult is critical to the emotional well-being of our youth. I ask the youth in our audience today to think about who that one adult is for you. I think that this image is a good portrayal of how we can respond as mental health first aiders to the emotional needs of our young people. And I hope that we can see their hearts and not their walls that are sometimes built up, and use our hearts and not our battering rams to reach them. Okay. Mental health first aid responders are there to recognize and respond to the signs and symptoms of a youth mental health challenge and to help remove barriers to obtaining care. So signs are what we see, what's observable, and symptoms are what's described or reported by the young person. Our goal is to reduce their distress and seek help for them. So a little background on mental health first aid. It was originated in Australia. I'm proud to say it was a nurse who started this, and it is now done worldwide in the US. If you want to learn more about it, what we're doing here is just an overview. The course itself is about 6 to 8 hours of at-home work and then meeting in a class setting and going through how to respond and help in a scenario where someone's in crisis. I strongly encourage you to look up mentalhealthfirstaid.org if you're interested in learning more. The goal of mental health first aid is to make it as common as CPR. And the idea is this: if we can learn how to respond when someone's heart stops, we can learn how to respond when someone's heart hurts. So what defines mental health? It's a state of well-being, and for our youth, it means that they're able to handle the normal stress of life, they realize their own abilities, they work productively at school and at home, and they contribute to their community, both at home and at school, or within their own friend network. A mental health challenge is when there's a change in thought, feeling, or behavior that does not go away quickly and last longer than a typical emotional reaction. And so in mental health, we look for anything over 2 weeks, we get concerned that someone's developing a major depression. So a mental health challenge, if there is an intervention early on, could become a mental health disorder or illness. And those disrupt the normal functioning in life, ability to engage in satisfying relationships and carry out the normal daily activities and going to school. So here are some numbers, and this is why it's important that we learn how to help respond to our youth today. Half of mental health disorders in youth occur around the age 14. Some happen before that, but half begin at 14. So this is when we can begin looking for those signs and symptoms that I mentioned as a way to intervene sooner rather than later. And the 3 top illnesses or disorders for kids today are substance use, depressive disorders, and anxiety disorders. And I will say from my long experience as a mental health care professional that the substance use is what I refer to as self-medication, that they're using substances to medicate feelings and struggles they're having. And sometimes it becomes more of an addiction, but if that begins early and we can intervene early, we may be able to prevent that. And so with this, I really wanted to focus not so much on the diagnoses, because as a mental health first aid responder, we're not diagnosing anybody. I just want you to be aware of some of the numbers that we are seeing right now. And the Surgeon General just reported that from 2019 to 2021, there was a 51% increase in emergency room admissions for teen girls who were suicidal. Now, what were we going through during that time? The pandemic, right? So that's alarming to me. But I know based on my experience as well that when an adolescent may go into an emergency room, they may be there for a few days because there are not enough beds in hospitals. So that's another reason why early intervention is very important. So here are some other statistics. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in ages 15 through 24, and that's the most recent data I could find. It was from September of 2022. I would like that to be not a cause of death. And if you look at the CDC also reported 1 in 5 teens seriously considered attempting suicide in 2021. There were over 6,000 aged 15 to 24 who died by suicide in 2020. Now, the word suicide is very uncomfortable for a lot of people. We should start getting more comfortable saying it, because if we don't address it, that's what's underneath some of the struggle and the pain that our kids are experiencing. And unless we help them bring it out, it may get acted out. 3 in 5 teen girls feel persistently sad or hopeless. 1 in 5 have reported being bullied. And nearly half of teens surveyed by the CDC reported non-suicidal self-injurious behavior, such as cutting, scratching, burning, carving, head banging. That's a lot. So this is some of the most current data that's national. Right now, Ms. Borelli is going to share with us some of what's happening here in our own school system.
Hi, can you hear me? So we have the middle school and the high school here. Ms. Medeiros does the high school. We have 317 students. Our middle school is a little bit larger, so we have myself and Mr. Thomas as the adjustment counselors. We have 525 students. So what we do on a daily basis is we make referrals for treatment, which means we try to connect somebody with a counselor, a therapist, or a psychiatrist, sometimes other programming. So you can see there's 7 for the high school, 12 for the middle school. Crisis screening is something we do on a regular basis also. If we see a student very depressed, changes in behavior, saying that they may be thinking about suicide, we can call the crisis center. A parent can bring them, they can come here to us, or they can go to the house. And you can see it's 12 or 9. A partial day program, oftentimes after a crisis, they may be admitted to a partial day program, which is usually 7 a.m. to maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon, where they go for 1 to 2 weeks, and it's intensive therapy. They do groups, they have a psychiatrist, they do counseling. Inpatient programs, a little bit more intense. They live at the program often for 1 to 2 weeks, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, and it's just intensive therapy, groups, psychiatry. And you can see the referrals we made just this year. Contact with parents is something we do a lot. It's if a parent contacts us, if a teacher comes to us with a concern, just really brainstorming what the student needs, how can we help them, really collaborating with the parents. And the same with professional services, collaborating with therapists, psychiatry, any sort of programs, so that we can make sure we can support them while they're here in school. So those are the numbers for Westport High School and middle school. What do our students report impact them? They report their friends, their parents, their own mental health really impacts their day-to-day school life. Their parents' substance abuse, they do come to us, concerned about drinking or drugs, and how can we support them while we're here? Do we reach out to the parents? Do we call DCF? How do we help them while they're here? Same with peer substance abuse, starts in the middle school, coming to us, trying to figure out how they can help their friends. They're being peer pressured, what can they do? We do have a lot of students concerned about food, clothing, and shelter. We do have homeless students. How can we support them? How can we support them when they don't want other people in the school to know, students, teachers? So how can we go about that? Grief and loss of a loved one or a pet. Oh my goodness, the amount of pets that die. Students are very sad about that. We have a lot of parental loss also. Divorce, moving, transition, conflicts with parents, teachers, or peers is a daily thing we all deal with. How to navigate that, how to advocate for themselves, how to talk to a teacher, how to get through a friend group. We do that all day. A lot of stuff through COVID, a lot of kids were home and they don't have those social skills. They don't know how to navigate some things. Same with the academic demands, a lot to do with COVID. They don't know how to take a test. They don't know how to study because they were home sitting. They don't know how to write because they're on the computer a lot. So really supporting them, helping them through that. Post-secondary planning and future supports, Ms. Medeiros does a lot of the college. Are they going to college? Are they going to the Army? Where are they going to get a job? How are they going to support themselves? And exposure to traumatic events, locally, internationally. They all have social media. They see TikTok every day, and they're asking about certain things. So we have to support them daily through all this stuff. And areas of support our students say they need, the transitional support, so 8th to 9th grade is middle school to high school. What does that look like? What does it feel like? What will the classes be like? And then graduating from high school, the same thing, what will it look like and feel like? Guardianship and adult agencies for students ages 18 to 22. Mrs. Medeiros will deal with a lot, but it's, getting them support once they graduate, especially when they have mental health services here that we've been supporting them with. Support with teachers, parents, peers, advocating, teaching them how to advocate, sometimes doing mediations with teachers, with students, really just discussing how they can get through their day. Family issues, managing their emotions, grief and loss, all this stuff they need support with. Employment, even as simple as how do I get a worker's permit, can be stressful for an anxious student or a depressed student. Relationship supports with peers and the dating scene, how did they get through that? And of course their academic demands, especially as they get older, when they see that high school, is really counting. They can't miss school, they can't miss assignments and stuff like that. So Donna is going to continue next.
So now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of what is mental health first aid and how to do it. The goal is harm reduction. And we do that through prevention, detection, and protection. The prevention piece is what we're trying to do now by the education outreach, the awareness, mental health awareness events. And then the practice piece is then how do we practice on a daily basis with the people we're coming in contact with or the young people we're coming in contact with so that we are understanding what they're going through. Detection is the assessment piece, which I'll get more in depth about. And then protection, it's what's our initial response. You just think of if somebody's in an accident and you're trying to help them during that, what's the first thing you do is make sure they're safe. You make sure they're safe, that they can breathe, that they're not in any life-threatening situation in that moment. And then the next piece that we do is mental health responders, first aid responders, is connection with services and resources. Mr. Thomas is going to talk more about that. And then the empowerment through skill building, Mrs. Medeiros is going to talk more about that as well. So in harm reduction, what's important is that you can identify what are some of the warning signs and what are some of the risk factors that a young person may have that may be a red flag or alert you. So you may not know anything about a young person's background. You may not know that they have some mental illness in their family, that someone had successfully killed themselves, or that they themselves have had those thoughts and have tried. But certainly there are some things, risk factors, that are very alarming and very concerning. And I have it at the top, and it's in capitals, and it's owning or having access to a gun. So the young person may not have their own gun, but they may have that in their home. And if they use substances, if they drink alcohol, if they're disinhibited and they're depressed, then that is a big alarm. That's a higher risk. Any access to guns for somebody who's depressed is a 50% more, twice as much possibility of them harming themselves. The warning signs are warning signs that you look for if someone's depressed or anxious, and you see if they're tearful or irritable. A lot of people don't know that irritability is a symptom of depression. Poor concentration, appetite, and sleep disturbances, decreased functioning. You'll hear about decreased functioning throughout, when somebody's not able to concentrate, when they can't complete their schoolwork, if a student is having a problem with that. And if they're isolating, and not necessarily from parents, because, part of normal adolescence is developing, that identity and that independence. If they isolate from their friends and the things that they normally love to do, is really concerning. And you have to look for provocative statements as well. So if they make provocative statements that say, I shouldn't even be here, I might as well be gone, people are better off without me, those are really big warning signs. And if somebody says that, it's not they're being melodramatic. You want to say, wow, what's hurting you right now that you feel that way? Can you tell me what's going on? That's a very concerning. Any statements about harming themselves or not being around is very concerning. I talked a little bit about the self-injurious behavior before. That's also a warning sign. It's a risk factor, because harming oneself doesn't necessarily mean one wants to die, but it does lead towards a more risky behavior where that could happen. So it's very concerning as well if there's any self-injury. So mental health first aid, what I want you to remember is this acronym, ALGIE. This is how you remember what to do when there's a crisis or there's a major emotional challenge. First is you assess. A, assess for risk of harm. L is listen non-judgmentally. G is give reassurance, support, and information. E is encourage appropriate professional help. And E is encourage self-help and supportive strategies. This is the acronym that mental health first aid uses to help people be focused and know what steps to take and how to manage the situation. So assessment, a lot of assessment is looking, but it's also listening. But if somebody has a cardiac arrest, what I learned was look, listen, and feel. Look to see if the chest is rising, listen to see if you can hear air passing, and then maybe feeling for a pulse, feeling the air. Well, it's look, listen, and feel really applies to this as well. So the first thing is you want to look at how the young person is behaving, and whether or not there's a change in their affect, their facial expression. Are they more withdrawn? Are they having poor eye contact? Slumped posture? Are they wringing their hands, or they're looking around like they're frightened? Are they pacing, crying, isolating, lashing out at others? Are they struggling at school? Are they struggling in their relationship with their friends? And the big one is the self-harm again. And, in this moment you're saying, are they safe? And is there something I need to do to hopefully help them stay safe? And then that could be a time, if they're in distress, you say, is there an adult in your life that you talk to or you can talk to? Again, one trusted adult will make all the difference. So the goal here, again, is harm reduction. It's to decrease the distress of the young person that you are interacting with and helping. The next is the listen. And listen non-judgmentally, being calm, being a caring presence, because you want the young person to feel safe with you, that they can talk to you, and that they can connect with you. They won't do that if they feel threatened, if they feel unsafe, they don't feel accepted. It will be hard for them to open up to you. Listen to the tone of their voice when they're talking to assess them, but also pay attention to the tone of your own voice. Are you sounding angry with them? Are you short? I find I soften my voice when I'm really trying to help someone. I really pay attention to the tone of my voice and the volume. You look at and listen for what they're saying. Do they sound helpless and hopeless? Those are really red flags for possible feelings of suicide or self-harm. Do they feel alone? They feel so alone. And that's true for adults too. It's a big red flag if someone's saying how alone they feel. If nothing brings them pleasure. If they seem suspicious, like they think people are trying to hurt them, that's also very concerning. And then you have to look at what's not said. If you're asking questions and you're asking them in a very supportive manner, in a non-judgmental, and you don't ask why questions, because why gets people on a defensive. It's what, how, and so, but if they're not responding, I'm more distressed about someone who I see is struggling and isn't talking to me, because I can't gauge that they're safe, and they're not answering me when I'm asking them. So the part of listening that's so important is, there's a lot of parts about listening that are so important. Are there any Ted Lasso fans out there? Right? Ted Lasso's a character, he's in a sitcom, but he says, be curious, not judgmental. So the part of assessment is you're curious. You have to be curious to understand that young person's perception and what the source of their distress is. It's important to find out what that is. And asking questions like, what are they thinking? What is happening that they feel this way? Okay, so you're assessing their thinking, their feeling, and in the planning, if they're thinking that they are thinking about killing themselves, then do they have a plan to do that? It's a very important part in harm reduction. And the issue of asking somebody about suicide makes a lot of people uncomfortable. If you ask someone, a young person, if they're suicidal, that's not going to make them suicidal. There was a young man who was a freshman in college, and there's a video called The Truth About Suicide. And he was interviewed, and he said, I would rather have someone ask me if I was suicidal and I wasn't, than didn't and I was. So the next is the feeling, look, listen, and feel in CPR, but the feeling part is in the give. So we're doing, we did assess, listen, and now the give reassurance, give information, give support. Validate the feelings is the best way to give support. So you want to see what is the feeling that's being conveyed, or is the person communicating either in verbally or in their behavior? Because if someone's pacing back and forth and they're not talking, it appears they may be anxious. So, you're pacing a lot. Are you feeling anxious? That kind of question. You look at the behavior and then you ask a question related to that to see if that's what they're experiencing. And then what I do when there are people who cannot communicate or don't communicate with me, as I say, what am I feeling right now? So I want to be aware of my own. So as a mental health first aider, it's good to check your own pulse. Are you feeling anxious so that you can't think and process correctly? Are you feeling overwhelmed by what they're telling you? They might be feeling overwhelmed and anxious too. And that would be good to ask that question. This all sounds overwhelming. Are you feeling overwhelmed? So I ask, could what you are feeling be what the person in need of help feels? And to ask yourself that, because part of assessment is also assessing you in relation to the person that you're helping and being aware of self in relation to that person. Okay. All right, and so we're going to move on with Mr. Thomas is going to follow up with more of what he does with the students and the kids that he works with. But I just want to say this to all parents out there, validation is a parent's superpower. Learning how to do that is a superpower.
Good evening. Validation. The reason that the kids keep coming and asking to speak to us is because after we've assessed and listened and given some reassurance, they get the validation part. That's so important. If a child reaches out to an adult and they pour their heart out, they give you their heart, and they don't feel as though they were heard, they don't feel as though they were accepted, they're not going to continue to do that. I took some notes down because everybody can read what's on the page, but I want to share some things from our level. It was mentioned earlier that we have to be able to talk about some of the tough stuff, because if we can't talk about it, we can't expect them to talk about it. We have to let them know that they're not the only ones that are feeling this. Just last week, I was talking with a student in the school, and he was clearly anxious, and I could tell that, but he didn't know he was anxious. I had to help him identify his feelings first, and then he felt validated because he said to himself, Mr. Thomas helped me understand this. And once he had an understanding, then I got to help him do something with it. But he felt completely validated because I'm helping him get to that point, and I'm helping him understand what he's feeling. Validation really is parents, godparents, aunts, uncles, it's our superpower, because we have the longest standing relationships with these kids. Parents, we're there from the beginning. Aunts and uncles and godparents usually also. Teachers may only have the last couple of years, but we have the longest standing relationship with our kids. The I see you, I hear you, I acknowledge you. They need to feel heard, felt. They need to know that you feel what they're feeling. This says here, find a quiet, safe, private place to talk. The student I was talking to you about last week was pacing the halls, wringing his hands. So if I'm going to do any kind of assessment with this young man, I'm going to pace in the hall too. Ideally, you want to have that private, quiet environment to talk, but sometimes you have to take them where they are, not where you want them to be. So if I had said to this young man, let's go talk in my office, he's got this energy that he doesn't know how to do with, that he doesn't even know his anxiety yet. He doesn't want to sit down. I got to take him where he is. Open-ended questions. Are you feeling okay? Yes, no. Those are closed questions. Tell me how you're feeling. Tell me what you're thinking. How does that make you feel? Even just restating back what they say, even if you're not exactly sure how they're feeling, they may say something like, I'm losing my mind. I hear you. You say that you're losing your mind. What does that mean to you? When you say that, what does that feel like? Get them to tell you more about what they're experiencing. And in doing so, when you're asking those questions, they feel validated. This person wants to know more about me. They care. Can you tell me more about that? Can you expand more on that? Can you talk more about how that feels? Oh, what was that like for you? Giving the support and reassurance through all steps in the process. Even from the very beginning, when a student is basically giving me that question, like, why should I tell you? How are you going to help me? I've already worked this out in my head and I can't figure it out. I try to remind them that it's not just, once you share this, it's not just you that's carrying it. Even if I don't have the answers, you're not alone anymore. But I've got 40 some odd years of life experience, and we add that with yours, and maybe we can get somewhere. Maybe I'll think of something that you haven't yet. Maybe I'll look at the situation from a perspective that you haven't considered. Kids think they know everything, but they don't. We know that. So in those moments when they think that they know, oh, there's nothing that you can do to help me, stop, slow everything down, talk to me. That giving them that hope at the end, the validation, is so important. I'm gonna stay with you through this. I'm gonna help you get to the end of this process, and checking back with them. So that they know that you care. When I've seen a student one week and I check back with them the next week, even if it's especially if it's someone I don't talk to regularly, they're so grateful that somebody's looking out for them and that someone's checking back up on them. That's real validation. And then when that student has a problem next time, they will reach out because they know that when they reached out, someone was there to take their hand. Encourage and connect with available services and resources. We do a lot of that, and we either do that through recommendations to parents. We can make referrals to outside resources. 988 is sort of like 911, for those who don't know, but it is like, it's 911 for mental health emergencies. So it's a useful resource if what you want to get is not the police kicking down a door. You want to get a more measured response, 988 instead of 911. Child and Family Services, the mobile crisis team will come to you. They come to us all the time, but they will go to the house. For a short time in, I think 2017, I worked at New Bedford Crisis on weekends and went out to more than one house, and they will respond within an hour. I think that's their policy or the law or something, that they will get there. And here's the address in Fall River. This new crisis center in Fall River is now open, actually. For a while, you had to call New Bedford, and they would triage to Fall River. Some other resources that are available. Some of these I wasn't even aware of until we started preparing for this presentation, and they were shared with me. The National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, www.nami.org, Mental Health America, and the Child Mind Institute. I personally spent some time on those two websites over the last couple of weeks. They're tremendous. And I've looked at the rest of these as well, the Trevor Project, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, Massachusetts Behavioral Health Helpline, and the Westport School Department, of course. If students need support and they're struggling at home, we always encourage parents, like, if you're sending that kid to school, let us know what's going on. Let us know how we can support. We've got them for, 7 hours a day? Sometimes that's more than the parents get them in the evenings. We should know what's going on. And now, segue back to Mrs. Medeiros.
Thank you. So a lot of the services and a lot of the responsibilities that we assist the students with as school adjustment counselors has already been touched upon throughout Sean and Jennifer's parts of the presentation. One of the things that I did want to highlight is that we try and help the students at every situation that they encounter where they're receiving support. It's about being a teachable moment for them as well. So when they come in and they have a situation, it's very important for them to know how my role is different than, say, their guidance counselor's role. And my role is different than perhaps how they feel about sharing personal or private information with a teacher or with their peers or, someone's parents. So I think kind of helping students understand the network that exists so that they can start making connections like, okay, this is where I would go if I had an issue with my credits, if I had an issues, with my future or college planning. However, Mrs. Medeiros at the high school level would be where I would go if I was having issues that were relative to mental health. Okay, and I think that that's also, that networking point is very important as we work and build with the kids, because it's all about knowledge, education, and how they can do some of that and internalize it for themselves. So, a lot of people will say, how can my child access you? Or how do you get to know the students who probably should come to your attention? And our referral process is pretty fluid here at the junior, senior high school. So we typically find out about students if they're not already engaged in special ed services where we're performing direct service counseling. We often hear from teachers. Okay, so teachers will often come to us and say there's been a change, there's been a shift, a noticeable difference in someone's performance or in someone's presentation, or students just coming to them and sharing some concerns that they're having. So teachers are a huge part of our referral source, as are our administrators, okay? Because oftentimes teachers will go up to administration, and parents, because parents know their children best. We often could get a phone call that says, I'm not really sure what's going on, but this isn't the child I know. They seem to be too private. I don't know if they're nervous about talking or they just don't have the words to talk. Is this something that you can help out with? And certainly we can do that through observation and open interviews with the students. Let's see, another way that we get to know the students is they'll come in on their own. So they'll self-refer, right? Because they maybe have talked to their friends, or they've had friends that have also been in to meet with a school adjustment counselor and have kind of, I guess, had a positive experience with it. Or we also have the students bringing in their friends. So it's not uncommon for us to have direct, contact with friends who will say, hey, I'm really concerned about my friend. This is what I think is going on. Could you help? Could you get involved? And oftentimes we will even have students that will do that anonymously. And all of that is okay, right? Because the one thing we want to promote is if you see something and it doesn't feel right, or it doesn't look comfortable, or you're concerned, there's no wrong in any of that. So you just move that information forward, and we want to make sure it gets to the right people. Okay, so that's pretty much how we learn our students. Plus, we're a very small school district, so that helps too. I know Mrs. Borelli talked about a lot of the things that we do, and so did Mr. Thomas, but just to kind of cover a few of the other areas, crisis intervention has become increasingly a larger part of our day, and much more of the work that we've had to do, say, a decade ago. And so we do a lot of that, and we are responding more to not only an increase in adolescent mental health issues, but as Donna spoke to earlier, we are really struggling with less services in the communities. So in the past, when we were able to do things like come up with a safety plan, a crisis plan for somebody, help the family make a referral, it's not uncommon now to hear that there's a 6-month or a 9-month wait list. And that is not something that we had to really struggle with, but there's much more of a demand and a lot less resources available. So part of what we have also done here, the three of us, is we have worked to bring direct services from community providers into our school building. And we've done that by formulating relationships with, we have child and family services, and then we have some private practitioners that come in, and we allow them the space and we allow them access to the student, and in return, the family benefits and the students benefit because they are able to get the services much quicker. It usually takes, sometimes it's as quick as 2 weeks to have the intake happen and the insurance to be processed and for the students to already be in a session. But it also eliminates any other obstacles. So if there's obstacles in transportation, if there's obstacles in, scheduling, or the availability of the child, 9 times out of 10, a lot of those obstacles are eliminated if it starts in school, and then it can move to outside in the community when that is something that makes sense for the family. So we also do safety and crisis planning, and as we all know, the reason why Mr. Thomas and Mrs. Borelli are at the middle school and I'm at the high school is because if you were asked a student what constitutes a crisis, it's very different in 5th grade than it is in perhaps 11th or 12th grade, or even for some of our older students who stay on beyond the age of 18 and stay with us into their much later years. So it really does kind of, allow us to really do a lot of education, support, and instruction around kind of age-related topics. And in order to do that, it helps to have us focusing on different things. So we also do parent meetings. I think that was already addressed. We do have mediations. So oftentimes we're able to help students mediate with their peers. If there tends to be a need for a cluster mediation, meaning there's a group over here and a group over here, and we need to find some harmony in the middle, we can do that, and oftentimes we will partner for that piece. We also provide group supports, so like social skills support is a very popular one for students who struggle with making friends or have perhaps some communication issues. They like to join the skill groups, and we can sometimes have lunch groups. I know that that's very popular at the younger grades, and it's not uncommon for me to hear when kids get up to high school, like, do you do that? And it tells me right there that met a need that they have. that was some sort of social construct for them that they really felt benefited, that they not only enjoyed, but whenever you sit in the presence of that, you know that there's learning going on and skills being developed. We also do direct services for any students who perhaps have a social emotional IEP or an IEP where school adjustment counseling support would be beneficial. And then this was big during the pandemic, but over the course of the 16 years that I've been here, we have always done home visits. And I think, as Mr. Thomas said, you need to meet them where they're at. And for some of our students, especially our highly anxious students, or students that are having issues at home where there's perhaps larger issues in the way of school attendance, it does make sense for us to go out to the home. And that is something that, is usually met with gratitude, because we can help problem solve. And we're not there for any other reason than to say, this is your child and your family, but they're also a member of our family, at Westport Community Schools, and whatever it is, whatever it'll take to help your student get into the building is what we're willing to do. And if that means that we have to, transition, go out to the house a couple of times, or then maybe have them come in after school hours for a few hours just to forge some relationships and get a level of comfort in the building, we're willing to do that, or whatever it takes. We also coordinate with providers, which was something that Mr. Thomas mentioned, but we also are able to go out. So if a student, you saw the numbers earlier, we've had a lot of students at the high school level in particular who have had hospitalizations or have been at partial hospital programs for their daytime. We are in direct collaboration with oftentimes their therapists and even perhaps their psychiatrists. We're able to attend those meetings. We can attend them virtually. We can go in person. We're allowed to visit the students to keep the continuum of care, so to speak, once you leave the hospital, and then perhaps do some partial work, or you're back home and you're ready to go. We pull all the players together for a discharge planning meeting so that it's somewhat of a seamless, I'm sure it doesn't feel seamless to the student, but that we make it as comfortable as possible. And the goal of all of this, especially with the high school age students, is to teach them how to do these things. Because once they are out, or they're 18, that magic age, right, the parents can't make a referral for them. They need to sign their own consent to treat paperwork, or they may have a hard time knowing where to go for specific support. So we try and take all these, opportunities to really help them understand how to use their network, how to ask for help, and they all know that if they come to us and we can't help them, we are going to find the person that will help them, and we like them to be involved in that process. So those were some of the additional services that we do. And then, last slide. Yes, okay. So if we were to go back to what Donna said about ALGE being really the crux, or the acronym for the first aid, obviously A is assessed, and again, just to briefly cover, that is based on age, which again is why we have middle school and then high school counselors, because there's a different level of self-awareness. Obviously, there's sometimes different self-management issues or boundary issues. Their social awareness, or their, in terms of making decisions, how many decisions have they made, what are their skills, are they comfortable making them, and relationship skills in general. I would also add that aside from assessing every student based on need, it's all relative to the individual. So if the student has, say some cognitive issues, or has other delays or difficulties in different areas, articulating, finding the right words, feeling confident enough to share, that is just as important despite the age, because age isn't, I guess, what it used to be. It's harder to use that as a benchmark around what skills should be. Also, L is to listen, and that's part of our role, and it's a very, very important role, is that the students see us as aligning with them. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to agree with them, but they know that we can be there. And if they have a meeting and they need to go to the main office, or if they need to have their parents come in for a meeting and they're uncomfortable about it, it is okay for them to invite somebody that they have a caring relationship with or a trusted relationship with in the building to be there as like kind of just a neutral party. Sometimes it's just enough to, to calm the anxiety. Also, G is to give support and information, which is something that is happening. It's all the time. It's ongoing. It's never ending. Sometimes we still get phone calls from them when they're 20, 22, 24, 26 years old, still kind of looking for that information, or kind of getting back to how do they build another network if they're in need of a changed network. And also we encourage connecting with the appropriate professional help. And again, that's education, right? Because we don't always know the best place to start, but typically it could be parent, a PCP, your primary care doctor, and then you kind of can go out from there. So those are all things that we like to support the students around in our role as school adjustment counselors. Also encourage the use of internal resources, self-help, and supportive strategies and coping skills. I think that that's really important to flush out for us. That's part of the assessment phase, is who do they perceive as being their kind of natural resources. So like maybe we need to start there. And what self-help are they willing to accept? What is something that even if they're nervous about it, they might not want this, but they might tolerate that. So it's just about giving choices, kind of putting them in the driver's seat if they feel like they can take some control over the situation. It's about empowering them to do so and letting them know that they don't have to have the answers. They're not expected to have the answers. But we'll go side by side with them as they kind of tease out the details and figure out what is really going to work for them. So I think that's it. And we'll be around afterwards if there's questions and answers. Back to Donna.
Thank you. So we're back to the picture again. There are 3 messages I hope you take with you today. 3 things that you remember. One is what I said in the beginning in the introduction. Early intervention is the key to providing a mental health, is preventing a mental health crisis or tragedy. It's key that as adults, and even as youth with your friends, if you intervene early, you may be preventing a crisis or a tragedy. The second is algae. Algae is what mental health first aid is about. It's the how to respond to someone, a young person, or anyone really, so that you remember what to do and how to help. And the third is this image. If someone is struggling, if they're being challenged, if they're having difficulty, to try to imagine your hands supporting their hands as they're sharing their heart with you. Because that is the message of help. And the message of help is their source of hope. So from here now, to tell her own story about her own mental health journey, is I'd like to have Marissa come up to do that. Oops, where did you go? Where did you go? You're in there. And I just want to introduce Marissa. She's the co-author, Marissa Alegria da Silva. I love that name. Beautiful name. She's the co-author of Graceful Woman Warrior. She's a dancer, which is when I met her, an artist, a singer, songwriter, actress, and 8th grader at Dartmouth Middle School. Marissa has been featured on the Engaging Voices, the Widowed Parent, and Positive News Now podcasts, as well as the television shows Book Around the World and WJAR Studio 10. She probably has more experience speaking than I do.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Amaral, for inviting me to share my poem, Waves, as a part of tonight's mental health first aid program. Before I do that, I'd like to share a little about my own mental health story and hope it might help others to get the support they need to manage the emotional challenges in their lives. I was 2.5 when my mother, who I called Mamai, received a stage 4 metastatic breast cancer diagnosis. We had recently lost my mom's mother to cancer, so this was a very difficult time for my family. My mom and I went on many memorable adventures together. We loved to travel to countless varieties of places, including Canada and Brazil. She liked baking with me, having mini dance parties in the kitchen, and enjoyed helping other people as she was a social worker herself. She liked to advise and guide others, especially in their times of struggles. I believe it to be one of her greatest traits. When Mamai was around my age, she decided to change her name from Luana to Terry. But when she received the news that she was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer, she embraced the name her mom had originally gave her, because it means graceful woman warrior, and that's exactly what she was. My mom had a blog that she wrote to help others as well as herself through her breast cancer journey. She asked my Auntie Lori to publish it for her right before she passed away. I was 5.5 when she died on December 5th, 2014. Since then, there have been so many people and supports that have helped me, and I'd like to share some of them with you now. The first support that I'd like to share is play therapy and family therapy. Being a social worker, Mamai made sure my whole family had received counseling after her diagnosis, and my father continues to make sure that I have a therapist to speak with as needed. The second support I'd like to share is grief therapy. After my mom died, my dad and I attended The Cove, a family grief group where parents and children attended together. First, the parents and kids would meet separately, and then we would all come together. Another way that helped me through my grief was talking to family, especially my dad and my aunt. My friends really supported me as well. The next support is Empower Her. When I was in 3rd grade, Auntie Lori found Empower Her, a group for girls who had lost their moms. Through awesome events and a mentor program, Empower Her helped me to know that I wasn't alone. Auntie Lori became my mentor, and I went to my first Empower Her event when I was about 8 years old at a writing workshop in Boston. As I've been enrolled in the Empower Her program, I've taken part in many enjoyable events. I've been to yoga, a photo shoot, the beach bash, and even a cooking class. They give the girls a fun experience while also letting them know that they are supported and loved. The Mother's Day retreat is an amazing example of that. During a holiday, while you're supposed to celebrate by either going out to lunch with her or giving her a card, maybe just staying at home and relaxing, we don't have someone to do that with, and it's hard to know what to do. That's when Empower Her comes in. They guide us by giving us a space to simply enjoy the day, as well as a reminder that we're not alone. When I did feel alone, I wrote letters to my mom. I used to write all the time in my free time, and sometimes still do. I would express the strong feelings I was having through my writing and use it as a way to cope. My mom also loved to write. The name Luana was what inspired the title of our book, Graceful Woman Warrior. Auntie Lori asked me if I wanted to put those letters to my mom in the coda of the book, which is at the very end. Publishing my mom's book with Auntie Lori helped me so much with my grief. I'm so grateful to all the people and programs that have helped me to share my story and to keep my mother's legacy alive. And I hope my story helps others to know that they are not alone and that there is support out there to help you. I'd like to end by sharing the poem that I wrote that is actually the reason I was invited to speak tonight. Life can be very stressful at times, and it's important to have a safe space where you can kind of just let go of that. This school year especially has added to the pressure, and my dance studio is that safe space for me. That's what the poem is centered around. Dance allows me to escape from the constant tension, and it's what gave me hope during hard times. I'd like to emphasize that everyone should have some type of escape to help them through hard times. This is my poem, Waves. Waves rising, school and stress, synonyms to me now. Days blurring together. Never-ending work requires never-ending effort. Effort which I do not have. How much longer is there until waves get too high, too rough, until the ship sinks, until I drown? Waves crashing. I am allowed to breathe. My mask falls with the waves. I am allowed to be. Others join me in this release. Somehow, walking through those studio doors makes me feel safer. No longer alone. All of us a single force, dancing through calm, controlled waters. They help keep my head above water. Only a matter of time until it is time to leave, and waves rise and consume me again. Thank you.
Thank you, Marissa. When I went to the dance showcase that I met you at, she read this poem, and I said, may I please use it or have you say it at my presentation? And I'm so glad that you were able to do it, because coming from you, it, I think, has much more meaning and is more powerful. So thank you so much. And as a side, I just happened, her aunt and I happened to have gone to high school together at Stang, and I didn't realize that. She said, Donna Amaral? Yeah. So things happen for a reason. They happen for a reason. So I would like to ask if there's anyone who has any questions or comments about the presentation this evening. Any questions for any of the adjustment counselors or myself or Marissa? You must be a family member. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. I think that one of the things that I appreciate of your family system is that you, Marissa, your family system was open to mental health, because your mom was a social worker and she made sure you all got help and support around her diagnosis. I think what can be very difficult is when families are very uncomfortable with the idea of getting help and getting mental health support. And I think that's part of whether or not it's part of stigma, that people are afraid because of what others might think of them, or how that might change the way people think of them. But I think it's really important, as I said, the sooner we intervene and help people, the more likely we're going to avert or prevent some kind of tragedy. And the idea that one has a supportive family, and an aunt who happens to be a grief and loss counselor. Lori's a grief and loss counselor as well. So all of those factors can help support our young people. But I think that the idea of having a supportive adult, in my family, the supportive adult to my nephew was me. And so if there was an issue, he would talk to Aunt Donna. right? And that's what I ask of all kids. Identify one. Is it a teacher? Is it an uncle? Is it an older sibling? Because these are confusing times, and I remember my adolescence. And it was confusing and overwhelming times. Any questions at all about mental health first aid? Okay. You all did such a great job. They don't have any questions. Well, I thank you all for being here. There are 2 more events sponsored by the Board of Health this month. One is on Saturday, and it's called Stress Less, Managing Self and Self-Care. And I will be doing that along with Jessica Howard, who is the director of the Heron Education Center for the Human Spirit. So we're going to be talking about stress, and we're going to be doing some things like yoga and meditation to help us practice ways to decrease our stress. And then next week on Tuesday, we are having a presentation called Promoting Parents and Infant Emotional Well-Being, Perinatal and Postpartum Support. And we're fortunate enough, and that's Tuesday the 16th here in this auditorium at 6:30. The presentation is done by Michael Yogman. He's Dr. Michael Yogman. He's a pediatrician, and he's the former chair of the Massachusetts Child Mental Health Task Force, and he has long credentials. I told him I have to cut him down, but he lives in Westport, and he's going to be talking about the impact of children when mom has postpartum depression. And then Carrie McCarthy, who is a director of Cape and Islands Maternal Depression Task Force, will also be here to talk about postpartum depression and perinatal depression. So those are the presentations that will be coming up. I hope to see some of you there. The one on Saturday, the 13th, is at the Annex at 11:30, and it's open to teens and adults. So again, thank you all for coming.